Hello and welcome to this ONUG session from Gluware titled Gluware DevOps for NetOps, Automating and Integrating Using APIs and Custom Data Models. Presenting on this session, myself, Michael Howe, I'm VP of Product Marketing. I am joined by Alex Arujo, who is a Solution Architect, and Olivier Hoonvan, our Chief Science Officer and co-founder. So let's jump right into it. It's going to be a pretty fast-paced session covering a lot. So in this session, I'm going to take you through a couple slides to introduce you to, we're not going to do a full intro of Gluware in terms of our product line, but I want to introduce you to our platform, really centric around how we use APIs, and introduce Gluware Lab, our integrated development environment that allows us to create everything you see in the product of a Gluware controller and the applications that we deliver. So in the first demonstration, I'm going to highlight our published RESTful API called GluAPI, and just show you interacting with Gluware programmatically. In demo number 2, Alex is going to showcase a use case that we have from quite a few customers around either building custom data models in Gluware or leveraging the ability to kind of create custom data models. And then we're going to do that in Gluware Lab and show you how you can build it in Lab and publish it into Gluware, or even build it and publish it through an API. So once you have that data model existing in Gluware, we're going to use an example of VLAN, and the VLAN database that you're storing, like VLAN IDs and VLAN names, could feed multi-vendor switch examples. We're going to probably just use one example, one vendor in this, but it certainly could be multi-vendor. And we're going to feed that API via, feed the data model via REST calls as well. So that's demo number 2. In demo number 3, kind of progressing in complexity, we're going to showcase how we would integrate a third-party API integration. And it's a really cool use case developed around a construct we have in Gluware called the custom script. And with our custom scripts, we can do really any custom interaction with devices, but we also can integrate third-party API calls. So we're going to show you how we integrate calls with ServiceNow. ServiceNow is obviously a very popular IT service manager platform. So let's jump on into the introduction. So just to really set the stage for those of you who may not know Gluware at all, Gluware is a platform for intelligent network orchestration. So it's centered around, kind of if you look at the middle part here, the intelligent orchestration engine and its ability to then automate and orchestrate primarily networking components. So we're focused on routers and switches and firewalls and load balancers, WAN optimizers. We've been making a big push lately around things that are API oriented themselves on the southbound side. So just to complete the discussion here, so you have the orchestration engine that is primarily commuting southbound via CLI or API down to the networking layer. On top of our orchestration engine, you have our application layer, which is the Gluware control framework. You have our dashboards, our device manager for things like inventory and network discovery. You can perform config drifts and audits. You can automate operating system upgrades with OS Manager. Config modeling is our configuration management technology, and workflows are more for process automation. So our application layer itself interacts with our orchestration engine via API as well. And then we have an API or APIs that we present northbound. And so we're going to cover really the 2 main elements or 3 main elements of that. One being GluAPI, our published API. 2 being the ability to expose API calls programmatically into custom data models. So kind of taking what we do in GluAPI, but extending it to more capabilities. And the 3rd is really around programmatic interaction with third-party things at the management layer. So now that you kind of have a basic understanding of what Gluware does, just to kind of fill out the discussion, Gluware is pure software. And when we're talking about our platform for automation orchestration, it is delivered in Gluware Pro via SaaS. So it would be delivered through Amazon Web Services. You install just a secure gateway and you're on-prem, and you can automate and orchestrate your network through that. Or we can deliver through Gluware Enterprise OVA format or virtual machine format that can be really deployed any way you see fit in your environment, on-prem, in your cloud, in a public cloud, in a private cloud. And it's powered by our multi-engine architecture, which allows us to scale to be and automate tens of thousands of devices. So with that baseline, let's take a little bit dive deeper and just break it down into kind of management plane, automation orchestration layer, and then the networking layer. So Gluware is sitting in this kind of middle area of the automation orchestration, because really what we're taking anything you might do manually or anything you might be doing scripting or build your own or using legacy products like NCCMs, and we can either integrate or kind of replace all of that and provide automation, as I said, of the networking layer. So Gluware is at over 30 operating systems we automate, and we're automating CLI-driven infrastructure, API-driven infrastructure, and API-driven cloud. So I think CLI is pretty clear. We write vendor adapters that allow us to translate that vendor into our data modeling. We happen to use JSON, and we're going to get into that in a bit. When we do integrations with platforms that are API based on the network layer, generally these are productized vendor packages. Like we recently announced in the Cisco SD-WAN, which is the vManage package. We also announced the Cisco Meraki package. So these are vendor packages that we built. You jump in and use our applications, and you don't have to worry about onboarding APIs or doing anything. It's all integrated. Similarly, when you look at automating cloud using Gluware, we have onboarded the Terraform engine. And with the Terraform engine, we can onboard various providers for Terraform. We've onboarded AWS, Microsoft Azure, and Google Cloud, which in turn, Terraform, so Gluware is the application layer on top of Terraform. Terraform provides the API interaction with those providers, in this case, the public clouds. So that's kind of southbound, our Gluware engine using generically what we refer to as the vendor adapter layer. Then as we talk kind of northbound, we're talking about ServiceNow, or maybe Infoblox for IP management, or maybe Git for code repository, or Netbox as a source of truth. This is where, these things are all examples of integrations. And what we often look to drive customers towards is if they want to interact with Gluware programmatically, the best way to get started is just to consume our API endpoint, our GluAPI, and you can, push in devices, you can initiate discoveries, you can execute drifts and audits, you can provision devices, and really nearly the full suite of application function can be interacted through GluAPI. So that's if you want something else externally talking to Gluware. If you want Gluware talking outbound more so, like making specific calls to open a ServiceNow incident or pull an address from an IPAM, that's where we leverage what we have in our capability called the Gluware REST Development Kit. This allows us to develop and integrate third-party API calls, and also extend our own API capability in terms of getting access to specific capabilities. And demo number 2 will showcase that around custom data models. So this is, hopefully that sets the stage for you. And when we talk about, DevOps for NetOps, really for me, there's 2 perspectives. One is you're trying to make NetOps more like DevOps, and DevOps works in like a CI/CD process. They're always kind of, integrating and testing and going to production, and it's kind of they're automating a full pipeline. I think when we introduce the next slide around Gluware Lab, you'll see how the Gluware perspective to make a NetOps person be able to work more like a DevOps person. The second kind of angle on this is when Gluware sits down with a prospect or a customer, and we're meeting with the NetOps team who's automating the network, but there's someone from DevOps attending, and they say, in addition to the things the NetOps team is doing, I want my DevOps team to be able to interact with your system programmatically and integrate it into my DevOps pipeline to make changes occur. And I think demo number 2 is going to be a good example of that. For example, a developer needs a network change, which is maybe adding a VLAN and turning up a port or something like that. And so they want to make calls into Gluware, and we'll show how we can enable that programmatically through REST calls. And we have numerous customers doing just that, interacting with Gluware programmatically, either directly through a platform like ServiceNow, something making a call to us, or through a CI/CD pipeline where they're doing a programmatic call from Jenkins or some other framework that is driving the pipeline. So in this next slide, I want to introduce to you Gluware Lab. And when I describe Gluware Lab, I like to talk about when you're using Gluware, the product, and most people start using our platform and our apps, which again, device manager, config, drift, and audit. You kind of see it in this right-hand pane. Most people come in and are using the apps. And the analogy is like to a gaming console. You plug in a game and you play the game. But sometimes you'd like to maybe change the game or add a level to the game or add a character to the game, right? There's always a need that comes up around customization. And sometimes it's perceived in something like Gluware is like it's a closed system because all I have is the apps that have been delivered. But actually, once you take a look at Gluware Lab, you actually kind of peel the cover back or see the wizard behind the curtain and see that it's actually a very open platform. And with just some JSON and JavaScript skill set, you can really add any customization you like into the product. So that kind of sets the stage of like, how do I build the video game or how do I augment the video game in this analogy? And that would be done through Gluware Lab, our IDE. So again, Gluware Control is delivered as a platform. You could have an instance running in your lab and you could have instances running in production. And those instances are connected to a distribution center, essentially a place where software packages can be published and then consumed. And the way where those software is built is in Gluware Lab. So Gluware Lab is a rich IDE. It's built on the Eclipse framework, which a lot of developers would know what Eclipse is. But basically built on that Eclipse framework is Gluware Lab that has been customized for Gluware. You have Gluware plugins, you have open source plugins, and you have the native Eclipse plugins. And you essentially have an all-in-one environment to build and develop network features and data models. And Alex is going to be showing an example of that in demo number 2. You can build and design workflows, and another component that Olivia will be showing, which is around custom scripts. But essentially custom scripts and workflows for us fall into the same category. One, you're working through kind of, in a workflow, you're kind of doing a wizard-based step 1, step 2, step 3, complete the workflow. In a script, it's more like maybe a single purpose utility, but you're then wrapping something around it like a schedule. And then in the third category of what you're commonly doing with Gluware Lab is doing the API integrations. So in each of these, you're leveraging the pieces you see on the bottom here, which is we have a full feature library. If you've ever looked at Eclipse is like a framework and you publish content into it. So Gluware has a feature library. We have our own development kit. We have our own REST kit. I talked about the REST development kit, which allows you to onboard API calls extremely rapidly. So in Lab, you do some work in JSON and JavaScript. You build the features you're looking to use in Lab. You can fully test and integrate. So we have the full orchestration engine that we run in Gluware. We have that in the all-in-one in Lab. It has our integrated databases of SQL and MongoDB, and essentially is an all-in-one Gluware package that enables that kind of DevOps-like mentality of, I want to quickly develop, test, publish to maybe a production test or a prod test or something. And then if I'm happy with that, I actually push it to full production. But through Gluware Lab, you're able to then package and publish these components into your distribution center or distribution area. And then in Gluware Control, you load in those packages and you're off and running. So the only thing I would kind of caveat to say is that, each organization operates differently. Some want to just consume the applications that deliver the functionality, and we'll wait for Gluware to kind of add features and expand our product line. Some need new features and customization, but they don't want to do it themselves. So they engage with Gluware, or we often engage a partner of ours that does the work in the customization. Or you fall into the third category, which is really what the target of this presentation, where your organization has some, folks that are fairly programming savvy, that are not afraid of some code or some scripting, some JavaScript, and can take this on, and they would like to become really kind of true black belts, if you will, in Gluware to develop in Gluware Lab and publish into Gluware Control. So with that, let's move on to the demonstrations, and you'll see everything I've been talking about. Okay, let's jump into the demo. So to get the demo started here, we're going to log into Gluware, and I have a Gluware Enterprise instance, an on-prem version, and I'm going to get signed in here. So as mentioned, Gluware is pure software, and this is the orchestration engine side. So I get logged in, and I'm looking at my dashboard here. And now I'm going to go like I'm going to be getting, like I would a typical user, I'm going to jump in and start doing work. So the landing place I often start is in Device Manager. This is where we're adding devices, we're discovering those devices. That provides an inventory where maybe we're doing network discovery. So let's take a look at this and how we would use programmatic interaction instead of driving it through the user interface. So what I want to point out is what you take is you take the IP address of your instance, and if you just type API-docs on the end or search from our help, you get the full documentation for our API endpoint. So Gluware's API is REST-based. It is using the principles and it's predictable. It's using HTTP, as you would think, in terms of building in the features and authentication and the capabilities. So like as you dive into this, and we're going to be doing, one of the first things we're going to doing is a retrieve organization. And so, for example, here is the command, and then I can see the example responses as I begin adding devices or interacting with devices. If I want to retrieve devices, here's the command. And so through this API-docs extension off your primary instance, you get the full API documentation. Okay, so here I am back in Gluware, and what I want to bring up is a REST client that allows me to interact with REST endpoints. In this case, it is going to be my Gluware instance. But one quick step before that, just a little caveat, is that in your Gluware instance, you do have to turn on your API endpoint. So Gluware by default is not going to be listening for kind of security and protection reasons. You want to click and go into your system settings and your organization, and you want to manage your org. And you need this checkbox enabled, enable GluAPI. Once that is checked and you hit save, now the API endpoint is spun up and listening for programmatic interaction. So mine is turned on. I can jump back to Device Manager, and then I'm going to move into this REST client here, and I have a number of REST calls that I have already saved to kind of invoke these and call it. So one of the first things you need to do as you're interacting with Gluware from a programmatic standpoint is you execute my list organizations, because in Gluware system is multi-tenant. So as I hit this drop down, I'd see all the organizations or tenants defined on the system. This is a demo system. I only have 2 defined in here. So when over here programmatically, if I'm going to run this list organizations, here's the API call. I hit send, and I can see the data that comes back. So this data has important variables that I need. For example, this is the org I'm going to be working with, which is ONUG POC demo. And here's the ID. As you begin interacting programmatically through API with products, you're going to find you need to store variables and use specific variables to then reference them in subsequent calls. So that's the ID I needed. Okay, so now that I've executed the command to list my organizations, I can do a subsequent command, which is to list the devices within the organization. So here's the command I'm going to run, and I'm pointing to that particular organization ID. So let's go ahead and send that command, and I can see the output of it, and I can see it's showing me all my devices. And for this particular output, might be a little easier to look at in a data table. And I can see the Aruba CX and a wireless controller and ASA, virtual ASA and a vThunder. What you're going to notice is it's exactly the devices that are here. So it's a way to programmatically retrieve the devices in the organization. So let's take a look at something other, making actual change, not just reading, but making a change in the organization. And this one's a common one because we often hear the request like, oh, well, I store my source of truth for my devices is in another system. So instead of adding them in Gluware or importing them manually or running a network discovery, all which you could do, you can also push them via API call from your source of truth or your CMDB into Gluware. So this particular call is to create a new device. So I can see here what I'm calling. And I can this is the payload in JSON, And I'm going to call this my device dash ONUG Spring 21, right? So now I'm giving it the information that I want to push into the system, and I send the call. So with that, we've interacted with the system programmatically, and I can see now it shows up in my device list. So these are all just examples of how Gluware, we're leveraging that GluAPI, that published API, and interacting with it. So let's take look at a couple more examples. Let's say I want to determine if drift has occurred, and if drift has occurred, then I want to reprovision the node, meaning someone took a device out of policy, and let's say my automation external to Gluware or some controlling thing like ServiceNow or something else is going to make a call to just reprovision the node to bring it back into policy. Another term is remediate the device. So what I would do is a short series of calls. First, once I have the device list or the device names, I would perform something called list the snapshots. Listing the snapshots gives me all the snapshots that were taken for that device, and I get the ID for those snapshots. Now that I have the snapshots, I can execute a diff, which is what our config drift app would do. You can do it in our application, but this is how you do it programmatically. I'm going to be sending, I want to compare two different snapshots. So again, I'm sending this API call, and I send it, and let's actually resend it here just to format the data better. Actually, this is fine because I was trying to put it in a table, but it's really not a table data. What it's showing me is there is a diff, there is a delta, and it's telling me the name server has changed and the NTP server has changed, right? So I can see there is some change here. And so let's say programmatically, if I've detected a drift, and instead of operating through our Gluware UI, you want to now provision, I can take that same device and I can now just reprovision it. So just to give you perspective, if I jump in the Gluware UI and I go to config drift and audit, the device I'm looking at is this CSR 152. And here, visually in the UI, I can see that drift has been detected and it was triggered by syslog. So I can see there's a drift. And if I look at it in the UI, I get the visual view here. But what we're talking about with this whole NetOps for DevOps is, are there things that are being done that maybe you would want, instead of someone executing manually in a user interface, that you're going to just automate? And so these are some examples of where, you're using some external automation, or even Gluware. Again, we could be automating all this as well in a script or in a workflow, but just, showing you that Gluware can be fully driven from APIs, the point of this. So the last step here in this demo is to provision the device, and I'm executing a provisioning. And if I look at the ID here, this is the ID for that CSR 152. So if I look back at I kind of saved out like my variables. I can see from my CSR 152, this is my device ID, ends in CCC there. I can see ends in CCC. I hit send, and now it's executed a provisioning. So if I navigate into Gluware's model editor, where I would do our config modeling, our config model management, I will be able to see that for CSR 152, if I navigate into the logs, there's a provisioning taking place, right? So I can trigger that and essentially, trigger a remediation externally if the system detected, if through programmatic calls you detected a drift. So I can navigate into that and see Gluware doing its work, going and ensuring every feature we're automating is going to be automated. And that's essentially how you execute and perform that automation. And now, when I navigate back to config drift and audit, I can see that syslog has triggered another snapshot, and I can see that I now have remediated that device and it is now unchanged. So this concludes demo number 1. and we'll move on to Alex in demo number 2.
Well, hi, this is Alex Araujo. I'm a solutions architect for Gluware, and today I'm going to show you how we can quickly create data models or JSON objects in order to send this data into Gluware, and how we can feed values from an API call. I'm just going to go off a video, and I'll just be able to share my screen here. So today, the data model that we're going to be modifying is going to be a VLAN database. So in this case, I have a data model that I can create as many instances as I would like. And today I have no fields or no data that I can provide in these instances. I can have as many instances as I want, but no data is provided. So I'm going to show you how we can quickly create and add fields so that we can, add load data into these fields, whether it's, this data could be added through the Gluware UI itself or from an API call. So in our Gluware Lab, which is the IDE that we use to develop and run and test everything related with Gluware, right? So we can run Gluware completely headless. We test everything in here before we can send it to Gluware. So, and creating a data model is fairly simple. And you have 3 screens here. And within these 3 panels, the first panel is how I create the form. The middle one is displays that form. And the third one is the result after I fill in the data into that form. So an example that it could be here is if I want to create the field ID, and it's just going to be a simple text field, and I can fill in this data, and then I can create an instance, an iteration of this data that allows me to save different variations of it, right? And as many variations as possible. Yeah, so today we're going to create this VLAN database list here. So as you can see, right, I started by creating this field inside of it, and allows me to create many iterations of it. But then I created an array, and I wrapped that one property inside of it. But I also want to be able to give it a name for the VLAN that I'm going to be creating. So we have different ways of beautifying this, adding a title. For example, I could come here and say VLAN display.label. And I can specify whatever label I want. In this case, I'm just going to go with VLAN database. So as you can see, I can quickly develop this list, and I can fit in my data with however I want, including having the ability to have built-in validation so that I can make sure that only numbers within a specific range are allowed here, or only strings with no numbers, etc. Whatever I want, I can have built-in validation as well. So in the sake for speeding up, I'm just going to go ahead, speeding up this process, I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste the form that I have created for this, that I would like to have for this. And I'll go ahead and I'll do beautify it and clean up this JSON. So this allows me to have, I can specify as many instances as I want in this order. And I'm creating, a different type of a table here, so that's easier for visualization. And I'm also creating so that only specific patterns or numbers are allowed in these fields. An example here for an ID number, that I cannot specify something like in control. If I were to save it like this would be an error and would not allow me to save because it's outside of the range, right? And the same thing is I only allowed to type whatever information I want here. So I'm happy with this form. I now want to send this to Gluware. So I'll go, or Gluware control. So I'm going to save this instance, this form. I don't need to save different iterations of it. But in this case, I do want to create one, and I'll just add a VLAN 10 and data. Let me go ahead and hit save. So what I've done here is create an iteration of it. So I've now saved one iteration of that file, and it looks like I have one more item here that I need to create, so that it stops complaining. So now you see the validation errors are all gone. So now I want to send this information to Gluware. And the way that I do that is I want to send it to that system that I was working on. So I want to publish this package, and I want to say, version 2, I would like to say, adding new fields for VLAN database. So as I push this to the system, I go into my Gluware control system, and this is somewhere that I did not have those fields available before. Now I can go into the solutions management, and I want to install that newly updated package so that I have new fields to install. So in this case, it's going to be a package. Oops. And again, this is the release notes that I just made. And I want to go ahead and install that. So now as I come back to the model editor, I now have that form that we talked about that I just created. And again, this is that instance that I sent and created and sent to Gluware, right? So now we're going to show how can we make a call to Gluware, an API call to Gluware to either create these types of instances or update these instances with the appropriate data. And then I'll be able to provision a device with this data or this information. So first, I'm just going to use an open source API client. This is Advanced REST client. And I'm going to go ahead and remove this other instances that I don't need so that we can visualize the one that I'm going to be creating. So I'm going to minimize this a bit here. So for this specific one, I want to create an instance, and I want it to be called VLAN DB list 3. And I have some data provided in there that's going to match the data that we have. And I'm providing the organization that I want to send this information into. So by then I would have retrieved this information from Gluware for making other API calls. And that's how I have this. And in this case, I want to go ahead and hit send. So now all of this data, that instance was created with the data that was provided. So I can go inside of that instance and visualize this information. I can, move this thing around depending on wherever I need to do, delete or add new ones. Okay, so yeah, now we just got done through running and creating a new instance from an API call. And I'm going to show you is I now want to be able to update an existing instance with new values. And then from an API call, I want to provision these new values to a device. So in this specific case, I have 2 VLANs there already. And for my API call that I want to make, I want to provide a new list of values. So I'm specifying the type of action, which is going to be update. And I want to update a specific instance name, which is going to be VLAN DB list 1, which is matches the name that I have there. And I should replace this list, the existing list, with a new list of VLANs. So as I hit send and that call is complete, I should be able to refresh this and see that the new list is now provided in here. And equally, it is provided in here as well. And it should match the same list that I sent. Okay, so now that we've just updated the VLAN list 1 with those new values from the API call, now I want to be able to provision these VLANs on the device. Now, in this case here, we've already done some work that this object is already assigned as part of this device that we're working with, or this node that we're working with. And I want to demonstrate and how we can make this API call. Of course, I could do it through Gluware, but I want you to be able to show that this is also can be accomplished from an API call. So in this specific case here, I'm going to use my client there, and I have my types of actions, and this is going to be a preview, and the preview type is going to be changed, and I'm specifying the device ID. Of course, I've previously retrieved this information from a separate API call. So I want to go ahead and send that to Gluware. So now you see that job has initiated. So we can, of course, go into this job and you can see the changes that Gluware is going to make, right? And the power and the idempotency capabilities, which allows you to provision your device as many times as possible, but yet you still have the ability to have Gluware end up with the exact same result, regardless of the existing configuration changes. And what do we mean by that is that the list that I'm providing here should be the list that is at the end of it. And whatever is on the device, Gluware is going to be able to compare and understand that this VLAN, right, is not on my list, therefore it needs to be removed. Similarly, the VLAN names, whatever is on my list and it is not on the running configuration, Gluware understands that the name that is on the running configuration does not match what it should be there, and he understands how to go in and clean that up as well. So if I wanted to provision that, right, it could be similarly with a separate call, which is going to be to provision to the same node ID. I could issue that different types of action instead of a preview. Now it's a provision. And as we return to summary, as you can see, we have a new provisioning and the icon has changed. So if I'm happy with whatever came up in my preview, now I have the chance to go out and put that configuration on this device and clean up the configuration with whatever it should be. And you can see Gluware making the changes. And then it will save the configuration at the end. And again, this is what has been the commands that were processed. And this will finalize the demo of creating a data structure, sending it to Gluware, and making API calls in order to provision to a device. Thank you for your time.
Hello, I'm Olivier Unvan. I am in charge of innovations at Gluware, and today I'm going to show you how we perform third-party API integration within Gluware. So let me stop my video, and I'm going to show you an example highlighting a ServiceNow integration. So what I have here, I'm going to show you an example of customers asking us to help them with tracking down switch ports that are not used, that are not shut down, and potentially could be a security risk. So I have this switch here that I can show you. And on this switch here, I'm going to show you that amongst all these different switch ports that I have here, I have potentially 1, 2, 3, 4 switch ports that potentially could be, there could be no good reasons for them to stay in that state, right? So I'm going to show you how we are tracking those ports. And there's this particular tracker that we have here, which allow us to literally track on any device, any switch here, that over a period of time that you can define here, weeks, days, hours, etc. So just for the sake of this demo, of course, I'm just putting seconds here. How you can track all these different switch ports, and if they haven't produced any activity during these during those here 5 seconds, I will trigger an action to shut them down and or enforce a default configuration change on those switch ports. The thing that I would like to do is I don't want this tracker to just execute that change when it can find some potential candidate switch port that might need to be shut down. So here I'm asking to integrate with this particular instance of ServiceNow. This is my instance that I'm going to show in a second. And that this tracker will have a tight integration with a change request issued by Gluware on this particular instance of ServiceNow. And it's going to listen up how those change requests are going from pending to approved, and will only perform the change when approved. So I haven't started tracking on these ports yet, so I'm going to run this particular tracker on this node here. So what I'm doing here, I am going to trigger this custom script, and note that this is just for the demo purposes, that I am running this manually. But what you can do is that you can put this around the clock. So you have something that can run every hour, for instance. And you would want to do this on the tracker because the reason is you want to set this up and forget it and have Gluware monitoring those ports and only interact with you through change requests in ServiceNow. So let me run this script. And I'm going to just do this, once here. And this is going to start tracking those ports. So nothing's going to happen in ServiceNow. So while it's doing this, and I'm putting the log window here so that you can see what the engine is doing, I'm going to show you my ServiceNow instance that right now is, a traditional ServiceNow instance. There's nothing special here other than the default, some default, changes right now on this particular view here. And you can see that, the engine is literally going through looking at switch ports that potentially have been inactive over the period that you have defined in the tracker. And you can see that you have these 4 ports that I highlighted earlier here, which are potentially, not producing anything, right? 5, 7, 9, and 21. So there's no existing tracking found right now because that's the first time I'm running this tracker. And so nothing happens and nothing is created in ServiceNow for now. I mean, the monitoring starts and now the tracker will look at the inactivity of these ports. And as soon as these ports inactivity period is greater than the one that you have defined in the policy, then it will literally start, producing some change request here. So let's run this script again. And you're going to see that in ServiceNow now, because it has increased the time that I would tolerate this with those switch ports these switch ports to be inactive, I should see now change request coming my way on ServiceNow. So let's look at that together. And you can see that tracking inactive switch port, right? Remember, we found 5, 7, 9, and 21. And you can find that, tracking started in that, around that time. And then you have those candidate switch ports 5, 7, 9, and 21. And then we're literally engaging with ServiceNow now. And it created 1, 2, 3, 4 change requests. So let's look at that. Oops. And you can see I have those 4 change requests here. Okay. And let's interact with this particular change request. And you can see that Gluware has, created this change request under the category network and says the change request is about changing the switch ports, from down to admin down because it's literally in non-connect for too long. Okay. And so this script, remember, this tracker would run around the clock and nothing happens until those change requests are in the approved state. So let's do that. Okay, I'm going to literally go through the process of approving. The change management is going to be assessed. So the ticket moved to assessed. And I've got that person that literally going to approve that this is a change that makes sense. Then it goes through the board approval for a change. Going to approve that. And from a scheduling standpoint, I'm going to define a change window here where I would allow Gluware to perform that change. And now I'm going to go and I'm going to run implement. As soon as this ticket is going implement, and again, just because of for this demo, I'm running this manually, but it would happen automatically when this tracker is automatically attached to a node and to run every 10 minutes or something. So you can look at this particular state, not the entire UI of ServiceNow is dynamic, but this particular checkbox is. So you're going to see that this particular ticket is going to move from implements to review as the changes have been performed. You can see it wants to review automatically. And when I'm looking at what happened, you can see that port 5, obviously, so let me move this thing slowly. You can see that the change request for candidate switch port 5 has been approved. It's in the implement state, and this is why now it's literally defaulting the config and disabling the port as requested, in my policy. And the 3 other ports do not change because they're still in the pending state. It's not been approved yet, right? And so now I can go and close this ticket, say it was successful, blah, blah, blah. And I'm updating this ticket. Oh, I'm sorry, this is not what I wanted to do. I wanted to close it instead, close this ticket. So now it's closed. And when this script will run again, then the tracking will stop, and because this port now is not in the not connect state anymore, right? It's been admin shut. You're going to see that the tracking stops. So the idea is that you can put this tracker around the clock to be able to track all your switch ports and interact with Gluware through the change request in ServiceNow. So now, how am I doing this integration? So just to show you that this is, that tracking is stopped because the tickets, the change request here, has been closed, right? So how have I done this integration? So we've shown you Gluware Lab before, and this is, for instance, how I'm showing how we integrate an API. These are the changes that I needed in order to interact with ServiceNow. I only needed, amongst all the available calls, the hundreds of calls available in the API, these were the only calls that I needed in order to interact with it. So it's literally one line, one call. And so just to give you an example of interaction here, I'm going to use 2 calls here, and you can see it's one line, one call. And I've just got a simple script to show you that this interaction can be done with that few little of scripting lines here, which is literally I'm creating a normal change request, getting the sysid. This is what ServiceNow is asking to use to interact with any object through their API. And I'm going to update it to just literally produce this short description and description for this change request. So just to show you, back here, there is nothing called ONUG in the change request. I'm running this particular script here. And once this is done, you can see if I refresh the page now, you can see I have now this change request ONUG that appeared, which obviously includes my ONUG. So this concludes what I wanted to show you and how quickly we can integrate with third-party APIs in Gluware.
Okay, so thank you very much, Olivier. Excellent demo. And thank you to Alex, too, for the demo. If you are attending ONUG Spring Live, we ask that you come visit Gluware in our booth and let us know what you think. Let us know how we could potentially help you. If you're interested in learning more or watching this after the ONUG event, check out Gluware.com. You can get Gluware free, doing gluware.com/pricing, and check out our free offer. You can take a test drive. We spin up a virtual environment. All you need is time to log in and run through some tutorials, or you can interact with our team by requesting a demo, gluware.com/demo, or just go to gluware.com. You'll see the request demo button, and please connect with us. We look forward to talking with you. Thank you.